So, Thomas, do you remember reading fairy tales and folk tales when you were a kid?
Fairy tales and folk tales, well, yes, lots. Which ones did you have in mind?
I was thinking mostly of the ones we associate with Hans Christian Andersen and the Grimm brothers, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, the Little Mermaid, stuff like that.
Ah, okay, yeah, those. Yeah, of course. Did you know that even though Charles Perrault is credited with inventing the fairy tale genre in the late 17th century, it was actually a French woman by the name of, and take a deep breath now, Marie Catherine Le Chumel de Banville, Baroness d'Aulnoy, I think that's how you pronounce it, who actually coined the term fairy tales and was a famous writer of fairy tales herself. Typical, isn't it? That while we remember Perrault and Bassi and Andersen and the Grimm brothers, when we think of European fairy tales, we completely ignore the woman who actually gave the genre its name.
Far too typical, alas. But it is kind of interesting to think that many of these men were not really telling their own stories. They were mostly just collecting and retelling old folk tales and myths that have existed as long as anyone can remember. The first person that we know of who actually published his collection of such stories is an Italian man born in the 15th century called Giovanni Francesco Straparola. By the 18th and 19th centuries, when it became quite a popular genre, people like the Grimm brothers were basically using these older collections to create their own. So by the late 19th century, different versions of, let's say, Cinderella can be found all over Europe. But the story itself can be found as early as in the 7th century BC in Greece, through the 9th to 13th centuries in China, Japan, Vietnam, to name a few, and then onwards through the ages into Europe.
Wow. So what you're saying is that these stories that kids today think of as, Disney princesses are actually figures from a kind of global mythology. So I actually think I'm going to love this segment.
I promise it will be fun, Thomas, and you will never see those Disney movies the same way again. So here we go.
Oh dear.
When you think of Little Red Riding Hood, do you ever envision her as this?
What? No, she's a little girl. She's supposed to be a little girl wearing a red cape that her mother makes for her, carrying goodies for her grandma. This is the same story, right? Where her mother warns her against going off the path, but then she's going through the forest and gets distracted by pretty flowers, and then the wolf comes to eat her. Oh, I see. This is all symbolic, isn't it?
Indeed, Thomas, indeed. The story warns us that all girls are marked by red, the color of passion and sin, right from childhood. And ever since Freud established that the forest has always represented ungoverned passion or unlawful sex, we know what's going to happen when the unsuspecting girl is seduced by the prettiness of the forest, don't we? Because, of course, even common usage in the English language tells us that the wolf is a sexual predator.
Oh, God, this is terrible. But thankfully, in the end, her father, the huntsman, he comes and saves her, right? And that's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, Thomas, insofar as the folktale is a caution against young men before marriage, I guess the father represents the patriarchy, so... Besides, in the original version, no one comes to save her, and the wolf eats her up.
Holy Are you saying that all the other fairy tales we just talked about are basically just cautionary tales warning young women about sex? But what about Sleeping Beauty, Snow White?
Maybe you should sit down for this segment, Thomas, because this is not going to be easy. Now, what happens to Sleeping Beauty?
Oh God, she pricks her finger on a spindle and falls asleep for 100 years until Prince Charming wakes her up with true love's kiss. Such a sweet story, though.
Sweet? Well, let's see. The spindle is a phallic symbol, so pricking her finger on it can only mean one thing, Thomas.
Okay.
And have you ever wondered why the whole castle falls asleep with her?
Oh, I'm so afraid to ask. What happens?
as well you should be afraid, Thomas. But if you've been following this course closely, you will remember that the values that the patriarchy upholds are materialized on the woman's body, right?
Right.
She is the culture bearer. So when the woman transgresses and pricks her finger, everybody is punished along with her. Until, of course, the right man, meaning the one sanctioned by her father and society in marriage, can come along and redeem her and everyone else with her.
Ah, of course. And if you look back over the centuries of European art, starting with the ancient Greek myths of Cupid and Psyche, you can see the fascination with the sleeping woman and the man standing over her.
Yep.
Of course, the unawakened woman is one who has basically not had sex. So of course the woman is biologically bound to the man for her sense of identity and selfhood. Okay, let me see if I understand Snow White correctly. So the mother is competing with her daughter for the position of the most beautiful woman in the world, right? Because of course, beauty is what women are prized for and something they can use to marry men. And the mirror is how they show women internalizing the patriarchal norms or that patriarchal norm of beauty as being the most important thing.
Well done.
Thank you. Okay, and the apple is simple enough. Ever since Adam and Eve, it's been the symbol of sexual awakening and, of course, sin. So Snow White, who's keeping house for 7 very small men,
I did not write this, Thomas.
is given the apple by her mother to sort of force this sin upon her. And so, of course, since there's no man yet, she falls asleep.
Yep, until the right man comes along and takes her off to his castle and marries her. All right, so now that Thomas has shown you how easy it is to decode these old stories, try your hand at the Little Mermaid. Ask yourself why she has red hair, needs to get rid of the unbifurcated legs and acquire real ones, why she pays for this sexual freedom by losing her voice, and so on.
And if you're finding all this discussion of sexuality very binary and heterosexual, then it's heartening to know that there's a lot of work being done right now on interpreting folktales and mythology in order to situate non-binary sexualities within them. Embedded in the activities for this segment is a video that you might find very interesting. And our next segment takes a closer look at the non-binary sexualities and their place in the world today.